Hi, and welcome to Unapologetic Women, a podcast about current affairs, culture, politics, life, and how we got here. Brought to you by Tony and Saoirse. Hey, Saoirse, how's it going?
Hello, I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Friday, weekend coming.
Yes, weekend is coming.
You're a couple of hours ahead of me, so I feel like that's why you're at fantastic and I'm at okay.
Very true. Time zones can be joyful in some meanings. I'm going to pretend I'm in England and it's 7 o'clock, not 2 o'clock.
And it's wine o'clock.
Exactly.
I specifically, but I know that we wanted to kick off this episode because we had a realization, I think at the end of last week, of a story that's on everyone's mind right now that actually combined a few of the past topics and the past episodes, namely women and their platforms and their voices that you and I talked about at length, and we've got way more thoughts there, but also this idea of government agencies versus nonprofits and donations that we spoke about a while ago now. And the story I think that brought all of this together for us was Australia's recent massive bushfires, and a couple of things that I've done some research on. First of all, Australia's always had and always experienced bushfires, but apparently like this year it's on a very, very different scale and a lot worse than normal as per we can see in the news. And the numbers are just, gut-wrenching, quite frankly. They're talking about 27 lives lost, 2,000 homes destroyed, 20 million acres burned, which someone put that into context for me, which I don't think I'd realized this sort of just like the California fires were 2 million acres and the amount of publicity and shock that people got from that. And this is 20 million. I've never been to Australia, so I can't even fathom that.
So someone put this into terms that I think will even shock you more if you haven't heard this, Tony. It's the same size as Belgium. The amount of land that has been completely eradicated is the same size as a country in Europe.
And I lived in Belgium, and I know Belgium's small, but it's still a pretty big chunk of land. So, wow.
Yeah.
So 2,000 homes, 20 million acres, close to the size of Belgium, and over 1 billion animals lost, which just broke my heart. And knowing that number doesn't include bats, frogs, and insects just broke me down. And I think it's because I'm able to talk about this now, not like a week or two ago, which I just don't think I'd be capable of. But the reason that we want to talk about this today is Celeste Barber, who's an Australian comedian and author, within, I think, around a week has raised close to 50 million Australian dollars from around 1.2 million people. 50 million is a pretty fair, big chunk of money. But what's interesting is she's raised it for the NSW Rural Fire Service. And so we just thought, wow, that here's a woman like truly using her voice and platform. She's done this on Facebook. She's raised money on Facebook, and she's talked about this at length on Instagram and Twitter to raise awareness about the fires and to raise the donations. And she's also calling others to do the same and kept raising that number constantly. But what I did want to share was a few comments very eloquently put from a couple of the firefighters down there. And I just thought it was really important for us to put this into perspective, which is basically the key takeaway was, okay, I don't want to take, and he didn't want to take away, neither do I, around the importance and the kindness of such donations. And it truly does reflect in this time and age, like the kindness of humanity. But in the words of this Australian firefighter, he said that it's so important for us to understand that both the Fire and Rescue NSW and the NSW Rural Fire Service are state government agencies. They both have gov.au after their names. And I personally think it's so important to stress, because although the donations are for the RFS, and it's commendable, and obviously because of the vital work that they're doing, it's important to note that these are organizations that are government funded and government run agencies. And they started to point out that even if this is an organization run by some volunteers and funded by the community, you're essentially, and this is the thing that really hit me, said so starkly, you're essentially donating to the New South Wales government. And there's something there that really struck a chord with me. And I think someone pointed out also, and that really put it into context for me, it's the same as us, if you were in the UK, asking for donations for the NHS, for them to get the scrubs and the needles and the drugs that they needed. I don't know, that just hit a chord with me. And it goes into a bunch of details there about knowing where your donations are going, knowing what you're donating to. There's been a fair amount of research around, Celeste Barber gathering all these donations. She can't either divert the funds. So this is interesting because the donations are being collected on Facebook. It has to be attached to a specific organization, in this case, a government-funded organization. She can't then go back and change it because then that would be seen like diverting funds to another organization and lying basically to the public. There's just something there that struck a chord with me.
Yeah, and then we've talked about this previously, and to me, it brings up the question of socialism, right?
Yep.
Is it the responsibility of the government to, one, have these funds,
yep,
and two, how they are actually distributing funds that they do have? When we look at this, is a absolutely unmatched. This has never happened before, right? This is completely unknown territory for everyone. But is it the government's responsibility to actually be able to fund that, to ensure that there is money? I tend to lean on the side more. I know less government intervention than you do, but that's the question that comes up for me. There is the socialist question. Is it the government's responsibility? And I think there's 1,000 ways we can go with this, but I think in specifics in the US about healthcare, right? Is it the government's responsibility to provide healthcare to their citizens? That's what that question is. And there are charities out there that raise money for people who don't have health insurance, doctors giving their time for it. Celeste Barber is doing exactly that with the firemen and women of Australia.
Yes and no. There's an argument that's being made that actually should the money go to the firemen or should the money go to the people who've actually lost their homes? If you're thinking at this through the lens of pure charity, then go and help those who are right now looking at basically a pile of dust and rubble and who are thinking about how much money do I have in my bank account and how can I actually rebuild this? And I'm going to need 10 grand. I'm going to need 15 grand. And realistically, you probably need 10 times that if you're going to rebuild everything that you've lost. And so there's an argument there going, if you're really about helping the individual people, similar to your point, people who need money for an operation, and you see a lot of that with animals and, just people who don't have and can't afford insurance, then I think the argument is, do you go directly and help the people, or do you trust that this money is then going to be distributed accordingly in the way you want it to? But also, I just can't help. Again, I definitely don't want any of these donations to stop. I think it's incredible, but I just can't help that if it's a government-funded organization, and this is what this fireman ultimately was saying, the firefighters need to pull together and say they cannot do their job with such little funding.
Yep.
And it shouldn't be citizens' responsibilities who are already paying taxpayers' money, or who are already paying taxes, so hence taxpayers' money, to on top of that feel the burden and the responsibility to fund a government-led organization, which I thought was such an interesting point of view, especially as it's coming from a firefighter himself.
And that, to me, Tony, brings up the question of what is the union's role and responsibility in this? If I know Australia, having literally just come back from there, and a lot of the clients that I work with out there were unions, and it is a very forward, unions are first in Australia. And when you say band together and come and upright against basically the fact that they're not well funded and they can't do their job.
Yep.
There's a lens of that, which I agree with 100%, but there is a role and a responsibility for a union to take control over that. And twofold, when you're in a catastrophe, everyone has to do everything. It doesn't matter what your funding is. It doesn't matter if you don't have, the right equipment or you're not set up for success, because at that moment in time, it's life or death. And so we saw volunteers, people who'd never been trained to deal with fire, going out and trying to fight it themselves, which I think, and we talked about this earlier, there is an element that is so refreshing to see that humanity is still a thing that exists in the world today, given
crosses
everything
borders.
That's happened. Exactly. Crosses borders, point blank.
I mean, it is right. In all of these, I guess for me, it's what are the lessons that we're going to learn from something like that? Yeah. Is the government, and I guess this is where you're right, the unions do come in of, okay, thank God that we got, 50 million in funding here from donations, rather, from 1.2 million, citizens giving up the little money that they have, and celebrity endorsements and celebrities, using their platform and voices to do this. But I guess for me, it's what are the lessons that we're going to learn from this moving forward? But, are these basically state-run organizations going to go, we had enough money, we're good, we don't need more funding? And it's just how quickly we forget history. I guess that's also what's top of mind, how quickly we move forward and go, oh, it was fine. We figured it out. We came together. Fine. But we shouldn't forget that it's not, these citizens' responsibility to hold the burden of coming together and doing this. I believe that the state government needs to be doing more in that respect.
Yeah. Speaking of women using this platform to make an impact as it relates to the Australian fires, I think someone who can't do this conversation without mentioning is the naked philanthropist, Caitlin Ward, who is a model based out of Australia, who on some point early Jan, 2nd or 3rd, tweeted out to the world that she would send a naked photo into your DMs for a $10 donation to exactly the same organization, the New South Wales firefighters, and has since been banned from Instagram for violating their rules or community guidelines of nudity and selling naked imagery, which there's not a lot to say on that other than I am appalled, to be totally frank. Like, this woman, that is her profession. She is a model. She takes naked photos. If you look at the historical Instagram feed, Twitter posts, like, that's what she does for a living. And we have a tech company that has decided to silence this woman's platform, where she's raised, and a couple of different sources are saying she's raised $1 million, but it's difficult to kind of pinpoint exactly those donations because it's kind of all done through DMs, etc. But it's, $1 million is nothing to kind of joke about, right? No. Like, and she has now been banned from Instagram for using her platform, in my opinion, for good. Like,
what did they say? What was the reason for Instagram banning her? Like, what was there even an official? Because I know sometimes and we can talk at length, especially you and I, about the roles and the responsibilities of platforms and what they should and shouldn't be doing. And I know that, like, I've heard a lot, especially from Twitter especially from Twitter, I think more of they're learning on the go. Every day it's changing. The rules seem to be changing. And we as the public need to sort of, just figure that out. And YouTube went through a whole moment there of just not, like, more the unknown. So did they tell her why she was banned? I mean, I guess it's obvious, but.
So I think she got I don't think anyone personally reached out to her from Instagram. What I've read on a couple of different news articles is that Instagram responded to her with deactivating all of her accounts and then sent her a notification to let her know that she had broken the community guidelines of Instagram as it relates to nudity for purchase. And I actually just read earlier today that she's changed platform, and she's now moved on to TikTok, which I think I'm aging myself here by the way I question the platform. But she's now moved on to TikTok, and there are people on Instagram who have fake accounts, and they're upwards of like 200,000 followers pretending to be her because Instagram's deactivated it for breaking community guidelines.
This one, like the place, I can't help but put this back into the place of the female body and the issues that everyone seems to have around the female body. Either you're showing too much, or it's not good enough, or it's actually going back to Celeste Barber, funnily enough. She first came or started being known because she used Instagram as her platform to post funny pictures of basically redoing what normal people, what she views as her as a normal person, and I'm doing it in like inverted commas here, but what a normal person is trying to replicate some of like the very artsy editorial pictures taken in the sort of the model and the fashion world, which was absolutely hilarious. But what was interesting is she was also pointing out that she had a couple of pictures either being disactivated or taken down because of nudity, because a lot of it is in her underwear, or you see a little bit of side boob or whatnot. But the models very rarely got their accounts deactivated. So there's something there about, oh, I'm sorry, you're comfortable with a very slender female body showing a little bit of nudity, but you're not comfortable with a normal woman's body. There's a whole debate there.
Oh, like, honestly, and the thing that comes into my mind for the naked philanthropist, like, that woman was going about her life with imagery similar to the one that she shared out to the world, unnoticed. That was a thing that she did. She was just a person on Instagram. She was a daily user of that platform without them ever saying, oh, nope, not allowed.
So I guess the question is then, did they take offense or did they get scared? And again, all of this is hypothetical. What do I know and what do we know? But I guess my mind goes to questioning, okay, was it Instagram for, oh crap, this is getting traction, this is getting a lot of visibilities, we have to obey us, we have to do good by our guidelines? Or was it truly that this was the first time she was actually using Instagram to collect donations and money, which she may have been doing in DMs discreetly? Like, I just can't help but wonder which one of it that ticked them over or ticked them off.
And I think, look, neither of us work for Instagram. Like, we're not going to know that answer. But like, if I'm going to live in the land of unknown, I have to believe that they got scared. The piece of, tech responsibility, we're seeing corporate social responsibility pop up everywhere. It's a buzzword right now. People are talking about it. Like, it was this moment of, okay, where do we draw the line, right? Like, is nudity the line that we draw if you're selling your body, right? Like, that's the concept, which, like, fun fact, the oldest and most recognized job role in the world was prostitution. So like, come on now.
Yeah.
I think that for me is where I land on what Instagram had, like the internal closed door discussion there in a tech company of like, what's our boundary? Where do we stop this? Like, it's got worldwide traction. It's got news. It's using our platform. Do we want to be associated with that? Great. They made the call. And now she's moved on to another platform that hasn't made that call.
Yeah. It's interesting because it really comes back to that or this big call that's been happening right now, a call for accountability, a call for these platforms to be held accountable to what they're doing. And that's only happened in the last couple of years. And the reality is, I mean, again, you and I know this because of the jobs that we do, but it is so much harder than I think anyone in the world can try and grapple and understand with. And these platforms are, I feel, always between a rock and a hard place, and that it's never too much, or it is too much, or you're not doing enough, or we want you to censor, but not in that way. And when you censor one thing, you're pissing off a whole other group of human beings. And I think it really is going to be like the ultimate hard and complex challenge for these platforms to solve in the coming years.
Absolutely, Tony. Like, and do you know what? If I think back to this woman in particular, and I know a thing that we wanted to talk about was micro donations, right? Like, she is doing a form of micro. $10 is a blip, right? That is a tiny donation, but it obviously cumulatively, that's where Instagram in this example have to take the stance of like, okay, these were like $10 here, $10 there, $10 there, but now it's $1 million, right? Like we have to, there's an impact when it hits a number that people are scared of. And like, if we go down this track now of like thinking about donations and looking at the just the insanity of what Celeste Barber raised, right? I remember you telling me, how much was it that she'd started off with?
I think as the time of we're recording this podcast, we're just under or just over 50 million.
And she started
it's unheard of. Yeah. I believe, let me just check 1 second, something that I looked at earlier on today, just so I don't say anything that's wrong. But they said it was something like it's the biggest, it's the largest donation collection that Facebook has ever seen.
Just because we know this, Tony, who's doing the payment processing for Facebook and making a pretty penny on each transaction that comes through?
Yeah. And
sorry, that was extremely cynical, listeners.
No, but, and so this is why I love these conversations, because we always start at somewhere. And so it's like the thread that we keep on pulling on and keep on pulling on, but it goes back to the accountability. It also goes back to the transparency. And again, for those who are familiar with it in like a post-Cambridge Analytica world, in a world where, we're going into the 2020 elections, we need to find, and I say we, I don't know who that we is, quite frankly, right now, but we need to find a way for there to be more transparency and more awareness about how all of this is happening. And again, if we go back to Celeste Barber, there's a number of articles that have come out right now asking these questions about who's going to look after these donations, who's going to distribute the donations, who is going to tell the people what they've actually donated to, because she kept it very loose. And I think at the beginning, she was only trying to collect $30,000 US, which again is still a pretty big sum of money. She had no idea that this was going to go all the way up to 50 million. So there are those questions of, as an end user, we're so, especially in an age where the call to action is so small. And I think you can talk about this more than I can, but the call to action here was just donate what you can. And she specifically said on a lot of her Instagram posts, I've made it as easy as possible. No matter where you are in the world, you can donate to this campaign. Just swipe up. You could see her. She was just saying, swipe up, just swipe up. And the Facebook page is there. And it's made it as easy as possible for anyone to donate. But that does also mean there's less of that barrier for us to question, who's profiting from this? Where's this donation going? In whose hands is it going to end up? And to your point, who is the payment processor behind that? Because for those of you who don't know, payment processors, generally, whether you're buying something on the website and they're using Stripe, or buying something on PayPal or Instagram, someone is taking a tiny, tiny, tiny cut. But similar to the $10 donations, these numbers add up.
And that tiny cut can vary from the lowest I've seen is like 2.4% all the way up to 7 and 8% of an individual transaction. And that's going to vary across the industry. Like, if you are interested in this, please do your research. But you're looking at a percentage of either every individual transaction or a cap plus a 10 cent, 30 cent, 25-cent charge on each transaction. And so when you think about this in the lens of micro donations, and just to make sure everyone's clear on that, a micro donation is a form of a charitable donation that is small in the donated amount, right? When you're thinking that's specifically what it accounts for, it's both for political donations and for charitable donations. It's the same kind of verbiage and language that's used. And we've just seen a massive uptick in it. I've been trying to dig in on some better figures, but the most up-to-date that I have found is that in 2000, 25 or 24.8% of the total donations for United States presidential election, so 20 years ago now, that was the amount of microdonations. Fast forward to 2008, we're looking at, and that's obviously the revolutionary one of Obama coming out and saying hey, you can donate small dollar donations is what we're trying to figure out, was 38.8%. Exactly. Now we fast forward to 2020 and we're looking at especially in the Democratic nominations, we're looking at Bernie Sanders, we're looking at Elizabeth Warren, who are their whole ground game. They're not taking large PAC donations. They do not have infrastructure where they're actually receiving $1 million donation from here and a $10 million donation from here. But we look at Elizabeth Warren, who just in Q4 closed out, so December 2019, raised over 20 million. 70% of which was micro donations, right? That number is just astronomical. And I don't know enough about the Bernie Sanders campaign. I have a lot of personal engagement with the Warren campaign, so I can speak to that more. But I know that Bernie Sanders is a very similar, if not higher, percentage rate when it comes to those $2 donation here, $10 donation here, $4 donation here. It's changed the landscape. We used to operate in a model of people to people, peer-to-peer fundraising was such a fantastic way to do it. But now the ease that you talk about of Celeste Barber on Instagram, swipe up here, you can donate. It's so easy.
It will take you less than 10 seconds. What are you waiting for?
Yep.
Hearing you talk about that, I had a question for you, which was, what is for those of us who are not as familiar in the campaigning space, what is the reasoning or the excitement for these candidates to go down that micro donation route versus, I can do, and I'm again quoting commas here, but far less work and get a big chunk of money? Is it purely that you don't want to be associated maybe to a PAC, or that you don't want to be associated to a big corporation? Or is there something else there for you that you're seeing the rise in those micro donations? And I'm specifically thinking about from the candidate's perspective, why is this exciting for them?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, Tony. I think if you look at the slother candidates that we have for the Dem race, right? We've got Buttigieg, we've got Joe Biden, we've still got Booker in the race, we've got Amy Klobuchar, and we've got Andrew Yang, right? That's kind of the main. There are still, Marianne Williamson just announced today that she's leaving the race with her love and fairies. I love that woman so much. We could talk about with her, but we're left with this kind of group of people who have a really hard line between what we say in the US as far left.
Yep.
And moderate left, right? So you're looking at Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Joe Biden as your moderate bubble. And then you're looking at Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and in some instances, Andrew Yang as this far left bubble. And if I'm in the far left bubble, the audience that I'm trying to appeal and attract to are more likely to resonate with someone who is excuse my language here, but fuck the system, right?
Yeah.
I don't want $1 million coming from a local lobbying group that is going to do you favors with a particular industry you're affiliated with. I want the $2 from the woman who works at Shaw's and is a key cornerstone of her community. That's kind of the lens that it comes to when it's micro donations. And I think it actually been replicated very well. And you won't hear me say this often, by the Donald Trump campaign. Because when you're looking at his like ideal persona of an individual voter, you're looking at people who aren't necessarily in the higher educated, like Lululemon wearing women and men of the kind of millennial generation. That's not his ideal persona. His ideal persona are people who are from, you know, some of the more socioeconomic challenged areas in this country, looking at rural areas of Michigan, right? And they don't have the money to give a candidate $100 out of a paycheck that might be $1,000 for a month, right? Like they have to rely on that $5, $10 donation. And it's actually changed the game a lot in how he was able to fundraise in the 2016 election. And we're seeing it in 2020. Like I gave you the number of 20 million for Elizabeth Warren. In Q4, he raised over 56 million. 56 million.
Wow.
What? And like the question that comes to me with that, Tony, and I've worked on many of these campaigns, what are we doing with that money? And I know what we're doing. Like, I know what we're doing. We're spending it on direct mail that nobody ever reads. We're spending it on extremely expensive tech, advertising, acquisition tactics. We're spending it on going door to door. We're spending it on salaries of campaign staff, on gas cards, on food for each of the HQs. Every state can have upwards of 30 headquarters offices in different important geographical regions, right? Like that machine costs a lot of money. The United States is also a big country, right? So like flying from Iowa to Nebraska to Massachusetts to California in a day costs a lot of money.
And there's nothing of that scale in Europe, which is always interesting when people talk about how much you can fundraise in the US versus Europe, and it's changing a little bit. And I know micro donations have come about in Europe as well. But so before I talk a little bit about Europe, I'm curious, Saoirse, for how long, in your rough estimate, have micro donations been happening in the US?
Definitely like 2000, Kerry World kicked off. Obama absolutely glamified it, made it cool in 2008. So I would say like 2000, it was like a thing that people were aware of. Into 2008 is where it became like an actual like democratic tactic that was implemented from the presidential level all the way down to your local city council race.
And that's what's interesting with this and these other things that we, I think, take for granted in today's sort of world where technology is evolving so fast, is that it's possible and it's able to be so smooth and easy today because of the tech has just changed so much that doing a micro donation, having the call to action for a micro donation today is so much easier. The fact that you can do it on Instagram is just, baffling. The thing when I was asking, the reason why I asked the question to you, Saoirse, about like what's the reasoning for a candidate to go down that route versus what I know from my experience of why it's exciting for the citizen or the end user to donate to that is, we saw this a lot with the Momentum campaign back in the day. Well, that was 4 or 5 years ago in the UK when they broke away from the Labour Party and had their own momentum. But the Momentum campaign was doing a lot of micro donations for the first time, and they moved away from the don't just pay £100 to become a member. Actually, you can just donate what you have. If that's £1, £2, which is more or less the equivalent of $1, $2 here. But what was exciting was seeing how the impact that just donating that small piece of money had on the end user who was donating. They felt part of that campaign. They were excited. They wanted to rally. And you saw it in one of the sort of meetups they have, annual meetups every year in the UK for each political party. And when it came to the Labour Party, there were hundreds and thousands of young people who donated maybe £1 here, £2, £3, who were arriving in the busloads saying, okay, what can I do? I'm now an activist for this party. Like, what do you need me to do? And they didn't know what to do. They were overwhelmed. The Labour Party were overwhelmed with this new group of human beings saying, well, I'm part of this mission. I've donated, even if they'd only donated £1. So it's just, there's something there about that transaction, no matter how small it is, the effect that it has on the people who donate. And I think we're seeing the same. And and this is where I feel a little bit for Celeste Barber. You're seeing the same now of people. Hey, I donated $10. I want to know how you're going to use it. I want to know where this is going to. They have questions, and rightly so. And so it's just interesting that transaction that then happens.
When was that Momentum breakaway, Tony?
you're testing my historical knowledge now. You really are. I want to say 2015. I could be wrong, but I think it's in that, that area, 2015, 2016. They did something new. And the something new was, and there's a whole other conversation that we could have around membership fees. Like the membership model in the political party system was kind of dead in the water. Like, did it mean anything? Were you as proud? I remember my dad being very proud that he had the card, the Labour Party card in your wallet that you would have. And it was a flimsy piece of paper, but it meant something, And so it was, there's something there that happened, I think, of just not everyone, to your point, has $100 or £100. So there's another way you can contribute. And it's just as meaningful.
It's so funny, Tony, that you bring up the card because, like, for folks listening, the US does not have that payment model, right? Like, there isn't you don't have to join, you don't have to pay to be a part of the Democrat. Like, you can vote Democrat and not be a part of the Democratic Party. But I got an email, I think it was on Sunday, from the DNC. I signed up to every type of campaigns email. And it was literally like, get your card, sign up, and you'll get an official DNC member card. And like, it was just so funny because it's like going back to basics, right? Like, I remember a campaign I worked on in my PA day, public affairs days. And it was a healthcare campaign, and we were trying to get people who were in areas of a lot of kind of social economic turmoil to join kind of the concept of Obamacare. And for the client I had at the time, we created this card that was like, I'm going to blank out the name of this, but like insert name healthcare. And it was in their branding and their logo. And it was this really exciting moment that people who never had been able to afford insurance before had this card that like didn't have an insurance number. It wasn't like a real thing, but it was a card, and it meant that they were a part of an insurance group that they'd never been able to achieve before. And going into like church halls and community halls that we did when we were on the ground, and seeing these people be like, oh, I have like an insurance card. Like it lifted people up in a way I'd never, ever understood the concept. And to your point around your dad being proud of having this card, like there's something there, and that's community, right? Like, I'm allowed to be a part of this. Like,
it's so funny you said the word community. It's where my mind was going, of this deep desire that every human being has of belonging, and the card allows you to belong and to feel to feel a part of this group, no matter what it is. And I can't help but I have a feeling we're probably going to have a comeback of these cards. I think people have way more membership cards in Europe than they have in the US, although I may be wrong on that. But it's just quite interesting to see that comeback. I mean, we saw it with people. I mean, again, you probably know more of this, but hearing the stories of people going, if you really want to get in front of your senator, send a fax. Like, they get so many emails and so many emails that they don't open. Mm-hmm. The way to get through is go to the old school, go and use the old school technology.
Do a fax, flood people offices with faxes. Like, and I have so many clients who do that. And they do it very, very strategically, right? Like, otherwise that becomes the new norm again. And that's the whole thing that people are trying to do, is like get attention, right? Like, how do you get attention of your leaders? What does it look like? And to bring us full circle here, Tony, back to we're talking about Australian fires, the amount of people I saw on social media, BuzzFeed articles, you name it, saying like, where are you, Prime Minister? Like, where are you? What are you doing? How is this okay that Celeste Barber is raising? And it was like Celeste Barber, Pink, and someone else. I can't remember. There was like 3 people who was at the start of last week were funding the entire operation. And we still at that point hadn't heard anything from the PM.
And when you think about it in the lens of social media, and I'm looking at it, I'm just like drawing a line between social media and new innovative technologies and new platforms versus the incumbents. And I'm putting, the whole institution and the Prime Minister's office and all of that in one end. What was also interesting is I heard more about the wildfires and what was happening and numbers from looking at social media than I did from traditional press. It took the traditional press in my opinion, a while to start actually sharing what they were hearing and what they knew about the fires. And I don't normally get my news from social media. I don't mind but it's interesting again how we've moved to things that are breaking and people understanding what people are actually talking about. That's actually happening now on the social media platforms, which I just thought was fascinating. It felt like the news was catching up to the communities on social media saying, we've got an issue with this, we've got a problem, we want to come together, we've got to do something.
and I've said this to you before, but I know somewhere out there in the world, someone is doing it, but I need to read an academic piece on the impact that Twitter has had, in particular, in the last 4 years on how people get crisis information. That's the thing for me that's crazy. Like, we think about it, even just literally this week, everything that's happened and the way that's been delivered to me has been through Twitter. The president of the United States has set a precedent that Twitter is the medium at which crisis information will be dispersed.
Yeah.
Like, who would have thought that 10 years ago, right? Like, we're at the new decade, 10 years ago, that a social media platform was a crisis communication method for elected officials across the globe.
And that's how they were going to do, digital diplomacy. And I feel like that's a whole other can of worms for another day about using Twitter for diplomacy matters.
Literally.
It was interesting because we decided, Social and I, that we wanted always to end the podcast with maybe a call to action or something that we discovered or something that we knew. And we thought, well, this podcast is called Unapologetic Women. We might as well share, either the books that we're reading or the podcast that we're listening to, or actually just share the Woman of the Week. And I think you said it, Saoirse, we can't have the Woman of the Week be anyone but Celeste Barber.
Oh, yeah.
And so it feels like a good way. We've shared, I feel, so much about her, but is there anything, I know I've got a couple of things, but is there anything on your end, Saoirse, that you're like, this is why I love the woman so much, or this is, how I got to be introduced to her? And I don't mean physically. The day will come, maybe. But, how did she come into your life, and what does it mean to you?
She came into my life via you.
Did she?
She did. You sent me
You're welcome, Celeste.
A little DM on the old Instagram of, remember? Of one of her fantastic video cuts. I think she was mimicking Rihanna or Beyonce or something. And I couldn't breathe laughing. It was that laugh where you're and I think for me, she is a woman that has a similar body shape to me. She is not this slender imagery that you would think of a woman who holds the amount of power and respect that she does, that I've been projected to growing up. And so for me, I think she's an inspiration of someone who looks like me, who looks like what I perceive to be normal, using her platform always, even before the fires, for good and humor and bringing laughter to people's lives. And so, that's for me, Celeste Barber. And you, thankfully, brought her into my life.
I had forgotten that, but the moment you said it, I've got chills. It's funny. The moment you said it, I remember sending this to you, going that she's just so us. She's so phenomenal. She's so you too. Of just can we have a fucking giggle once in a while, please, human beings? Yeah. And I cannot for the life of me, which is really bad, remember at what point I discovered her and where, but I know that she had an impact on me because it was at a point where I was I just can't, Instagram is turning into this sort of fake world where I know of friends who are going through things or deeply unhappy in this moment or struggling, and yet they're still posting, and I don't judge them for that, I've done it the same, but these happy moments where it all looks like you're having a rosy life and everything is great. And she allowed for a bit of that humanity and realness in the most uncruel, in the most just beautiful way of just we've all got bodies. We look at these images and so she allowed for this, I don't know, for really this blip in the moment of going, perfection is beautiful to look at, but let's not forget that it's what it is. It's perfection that's been created. It doesn't exist. It's been manipulated. And she just came into my life at that right moment where I think fell in love again with Instagram via her, of going, there's more people like her. And it also just taught me the bubbles that you create for yourself. I mean, I had this during the Brexit campaign as well. There's no way this is going to happen because look around me. I'm talking, but wait a minute. I'm talking to all people who think and talk like me. And she allowed me to burst that bubble of just these people that I were following that created beautiful imagery, but that's what all it was. It wasn't life.
Well, it's the curation of an Instagram account, which that's people's jobs. That's actually people's jobs. If I bring it back to our naked philanthropist, she actually wrote a thing of she didn't realize how fast it was going to blow up. So she had to hire 4 people to work with her on her Instagram messages, right? That curation thing is real. And the last thing I'll say on Celeste Barber, I love, and this is my interpretation, I do not know if this is actually her intention here, but how she objectifies her husband, the way that women are objectified, right? Her husband's account, for all of you guys, it's called Hot Husband. And he's a very handsome man. He's very muscular and tanned and like, but that to me is just the epitome of why I love her. Like, she takes something that is deeply entrenched in how, women are raised and are looked at as objects. And she does that with her husband in a very jovial and caring way, because she deeply obviously loves this man. It's the father of her children, etc. But like, that to me is a amazing fun fact, I guess, about Celeste.
I love it. And one more fact that you'll have to tune in next week for us to talk more about that. But she has a whole, that I did not know. She wrote a book, go and read it. It's phenomenal. It's called Challenge Accepted. She's wrote a kid's book too. So if you're into that, read that too, if you had kids. But what's fun is she also did a YouTube channel where she partnered with HelloFresh and does HelloFresh meals with celebrities on YouTube. So I'll be sending you that link.
How did I not know that?
Well, I only discovered this today. But yeah, that's the thing.
Well, I'm excited. I hope you all are. Well, yeah, thank you, Tony. This was great.
Thank you, Saoirse, and thank you, everyone. And I'll talk to you next week.
All right.
I have the fun and mildly awkward task of closing out this episode today. Thank you all for listening to Unapologetic Women. This is Tony.
And I'm Saoirse.
You can always catch all of the previous episodes at www.unapologeticwomen.com. And please do feel inclined to subscribe.
And maybe even give us a review.
That's a nice one, yes. Thanks, Saoirse. Give us a review. Only if you like it, though.
Yes.
If you don't, we don't want to hear from you. Well, that's actually not true, because we do. Okay, see you all. Thank you for listening and tuning in.